I'm Antoinette Mosley. I'm an attorney, a voting rights advocate, a legacy Ashevillean, and a lover of all things Black girl magic. This work is in my blood. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was founded in North Carolina on the campus of Shaw University, where both of my parents were in attendance. So I grew up understanding the struggle of the civil rights era. I am a child of the movement. I integrated my elementary school when I was 5 years old, went on to high school to be the only Black girl in attendance. It's a part of who I am. I did not realize that what I was doing was social action when I was 5 years old, but I've carried it ever since. I knew when I was 8 years old that I wanted to be an attorney. I think in terms of justice, and justice is equity, and equity is justice. When speaking to Asheville in particular, I'm reminded of the fabulous work that Dr. Dwight Mullen has done in the research provided in the state of Black Asheville. So when you ask what the effects have been, the challenge would be to find an area where Blacks have not been disproportionately negatively affected, whether it is in education, economic development, business, you name it. African Americans, unfortunately, lag behind, and in many cases, far behind. You know, I was looking at a study, and if folks are familiar with what Equal Pay Day is, that is the date by which a person of color has to work to have the same earning capacity of the previous year as white men. I've chosen to hone in on issues affecting Black women in particular, and it's shockingly sad to realize that as a Black woman, one has to work until August of the following year to reach the same area, same mode of economic attainment as white male counterparts. That's important to me. You know, there was a time when I would wrestle with that question. That's not where I am anymore. You know, when you get on an airplane and at the very beginning, they're giving you the speech of, you know, should we lose pressure, an air mask will fall. The first thing they say is, put the mask on yourself, because you have to be safe and protected before you can help others. In light of this past year, the pandemic, the racial awakening, my first priority is to look after those who have been the most negatively affected, the most harmed. And for me, that's Black women. We find ourselves in a position of intersectionality where to be a Black woman means really not to be a woman, and in some instances, not to be considered Black. I am an advocate for the cause of Black women, because as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. You know, I think it's important that Black people are involved in every arena. We need our activists. We need our advocates. We need folks one-on-one in community. One thing I love about Asheville is I feel like we're just the right size. Big enough to get things done, but small enough to be able to reach out and connect with any member of the community if we try that. I found that what works best for me on a personal level is one-on-one conversations. Let's get together, let's have involvement in every arena. We're doing so much better. Right now, it's the first time we have an all-female council and 3 Black women on council. I don't know that's happened anywhere in North Carolina. And we should be proud of that because that happened in our town, in our hometown.
Hi, my name is Rob Thomas. 33-year-old Black male, native to Asheville, North Carolina. And the work actually that I am involved in is extremely broad. I guess you could focus it more on advocacy. And advocacy is simply speaking out and creating awareness and actions towards specific instances that are pertaining to racial justice, whether it's responding to policies and systems change, or things that have happened that should be addressed in a better form and fashion. This work is important to me because I haven't been impacted by almost everything that I've advocated for change around, whether it's housing, whether it's education, whether it's economics, whether it's the criminal justice system, whether it's disparities that we see in healthcare and the social determinants of health. They all have directly impacted my life and currently still impact my life. Well, the disparities that we see in the metrics and data of, specifically speaking about the state of Black Asheville, and, you can look at this data on the stateofblackasheville.com. It pretty much outlines the story of what the impact has been, whether it's the mortality rate of infants and mothers within the healthcare system, whether it's the amount of money that the average Black mother makes a year, whether it's the opportunity/achievement gap, whether it's incarceration, recidivism, the amount of businesses that are present in Asheville that are Black or minority owned, and the list goes on and on. The only way to move forward is to keep speaking truth to power and, showing, improving the history with, through incidents that happen, whether it's the policies, whether it's the outcomes of the said policies, or whether you're talking about specific instances that happened within your life, using our stories and using the history that has been documented. It probably is the greatest and easiest weapon for us to use in these situations. The action steps, first of all, you have to educate yourself, us as a people and the people that are accomplices with us. We have to educate ourselves pertaining to the history so that we know exactly what it is that we're looking to change. Then after you've educated yourself, that's when you gather together a lot of like-minded individuals, and then that's when you mobilize and you take specific action to cause specific change. You kind of target and identify what it is that you want to change, and you identify a solution, and then you do whatever it takes to get those solutions implemented. Whether that is continuing to educate others around you and build a larger force, or advocate for something very specific, such as a policy change. And perseverance is probably the biggest thing that I could say.
All right, my name is Libby Kyles, and I'm a native of Asheville, North Carolina. I was a public school teacher for 22 years, former CEO of the YWCA, started an organization called YTL Training Programs, which is Youth Transformed for Life, and I am a member of Black Asheville Demand. So racial and social justice work is a part of my DNA, and I've been doing it all my life. This work is important to me for several reasons. First and foremost, I think it's imperative that Black and brown children and all children of color grow up in a world where they are treated equitably. They have what they need to be successful, both academically and socially. And it's important that those of us who have experienced the disparities that exist within our community and within our country help to make the world a better place for those children. Well, one of the impacts of racial and social inequities is our achievement gap. I'm sorry, they're calling it the opportunity gap now. But that is one of the major impacts that has happened in our community because of the lack of equity. So how do we move forward? You move forward with the people you have. We can often get stuck and say, well, everyone doesn't agree and everyone doesn't believe. And the reality is, it's unrealistic for us to think that we're going to carry everyone along, that everyone's going to agree and everyone's going to want to move at the same time. When you have a good following and you gather people, you move with the people who are ready to move. Strategies. One of the things that immediately comes to mind is about the community making sure that we hold our city officials, our county officials responsible. And I use the word responsible and not accountable, because accountability, in my opinion, is an individual characteristic. I hold myself accountable for the things that I need to do. And we've been trained to think that we somehow can make people accountable for their actions. We can't hold them accountable, but we can hold them responsible, and we can continuously point out when people go against what they say they're about and when they're not working equitably in our communities. We can also take the time to really get to know each other across our communities and have a deeper understanding of where we all come from and how we came to this place. And foremost, I think we can have an agreement where, as we work in community, we commit to do no harm. We are not always going to agree with every group, with every movement, but we can agree that in the work that we do, we don't harm one another.
My name is Shanika Smith. I'm the Vice Mayor of the City of Asheville. I was elected in 2017, and my work at the time was really entrenched in racial justice, specifically around the area of community healing. The work has translated a lot to the policymaking and decision-making level. I'm just from the school of, I'm hesitating a little bit because I'm from the school of thought that no one person or one role or organization can really bring about the change that we need to see, that roles work. They're very interconnected. So as a policy maker or a city leader, I look to activists, advocates, and helpers and healers to work together to inform the decisions that we make on the city and policy making level. Without that, it can be really isolated. And when you're engulfed in government and not have your ear to the community, or have friends, trusted ones, constituents, or even people who might not appear to be in the best interest of your train of thought or the community, that all informs and helps move past some of the blind spots that we're on the government level, because it can be such entrenched work. At the very beginning, the work was purposed in me with just a very fundamental thing in mind. There are a lot of organizations in Asheville that do good work. There are a lot of activists and advocates who do the heavy lifting. But in 2017, I started to have this ideological shift about my leadership and understanding that a lot of the resources and decisions and the fate of the community, the sustainability of a lot of our ideas and organizations in the community at large, they don't always come only from the community level, that we needed someone in the higher seats of power. Race has a long-standing history in America and throughout the world, and it's kind of hard to even quantify the impact. But at this venture, I'm working on shifting my mindset to the now. Where are we now in relations to the pandemic, in relations to the switch in administrative power, in relations to what we have on the table right now in our county and city reparations. So everything right now that I really appreciated about Asheville and the tremendous work that we've done around racial equity training. It was a lot of information, a lot of book clubs. We are a wealth of information. How do we design the context for our now? We still have to, in spite of some of the indifferences, we still have to work to be a high involvement community. And that's going to come from people with diverse ideas, people with very obscure beliefs, and sometimes naysayers. But I'm of the persuasion that when you're a highly involved and engaged community, which I think we are in some sense, we're not as connected, but once we start to strengthen our connections, then I think we can perform at higher levels when it comes to actually moving the needles. But we're very siloed in all the beauty and in all the good work. We are a resource wealthy city, and I believe that you have to sometimes make a good case for or explain your why. And I think our why for moving forward in the fight for racial justice, I think is found in the context of collective liberation. Like, I think there is a saying that's often used, and I'm trying to pull it right now, that a rising tide should lift all boats. It's just a very, it's the art of explaining or making a case so that all of us are able to, as an entire world, because as we talk about the pandemic, it's bringing us into more of a world view. Then we have more of a world view if we're able to make a case about what Blackness means to the human race. The fundamental thing, and I've said this before because it's just the train of thought where I am right now, is that we're going to have to make amends relationally, and in order for us to design context for our now, we have to negotiate some wrongs, and I'm talking about relationship-wise. And to be able to come together and feel psychologically safe to talk about our indifferences, to talk about our blind spots, to bring forth our difficult truths. We are a very powerful community, and I'm not being an optimist in saying that it's a reality. So, yeah, I think we need to work at the fundamental level of being good to our neighbors.
So my name is Brian Thompson. I'm a part of an organization, a nonprofit located in Asheville, North Carolina, called Youth Outright. And we do consent, sex education, and racial justice programming for queer youth in Western North Carolina. And I've been in that role for about 8 months now, started back in July of this year. And it's been really great to just work with kids around the intersectionalities of gender, sexuality, race, and how there is so much work to be done to really make it feel inclusive as possible. I also serve as one of the presidents at my college, which is Warren Wilson College, one of the presidents for the Black Student Union on campus. And through the Black Student Union, we facilitate spaces of celebration and healing for our Black community members. And that's not just students, but also Black faculty and staff. And this past June pushed out a document of demands to the institution around restructuring and implementing these 19 demands. I think people are going to be so upset if I can't remember the number of demands, but it's more than 10. And it was just like a call in to the institution that these things need to be implemented so that not just Black students on campus, but other non-Black students of color, as well as faculty and staff of color, feel seen and feel like they actually are a part of the community. So really working to cancel out disparities that make BIPOC folk on campus feel othered. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing. I recently, throughout the summer, got involved with Black AVL, which is a intergenerational collective of Black community members in Asheville. And we've just been working throughout the summer and still now, and we'll continue to do work around things such as like rent assistance for families and communities that have been impacted by COVID-19 and other forms of racial and social justice work. Because it's my life, that's like so cliche, but it just like is so intrinsically a part of who I am and like a part of my DNA. And it's like I waking up and just existing in the body that I do, the hue and shade of color that I am within itself is a part of the quote unquote work, and is like a radical form of resistance against systems and structures that try so adamantly to silence and erase people that look like me and myself. And so, yeah, I just find great pride in really facilitating spaces where people that look like me and other people that are continuously marginalized can feel seen and held and celebrated and listened to. I think that's the biggest thing that we've seen that has shifted in 2020 is folks' narratives and experiences are actually being listened to and are actually being held in a way that is creating change. And I think where I come into a bit of like quarrel with myself is like I can be impatient when it comes to change, and I like just want it to happen like very reactionary. And this year has been really important for me to like sit in the stillness and embrace, you know, the patient nature of change that is happening globally, which is really exciting. And so, yeah, that's why the work is important to me, because it is me. I am the work, but I'm also not, the work isn't all of who I am. I think that's really important to name. I feel like folks that are doing a lot of this advocacy work, whether it's around racial or social justice, a lot of times that is like they are attached to that and it kind of becomes monolithic, but there's so much more to the experience of specifically Black people. Like Blackness is so has so many multitudes. And so, yeah, I've just been really trying to exist within the work as well as exist within myself in a framework that doesn't involve the work. Yeah, so I have been living in Asheville for 4 years now almost. I came January 2017, and I feel like I still am very much a newbie, very new to the Asheville scene, specifically like Black communities and other POC communities, until this summer where I, really got involved in doing the work. And so I've been learning throughout these last 7 to 8 months that there are stories and there are experiences that deserve to be exhumed and deserve to be celebrated and centered and amplified, and just learning a lot about the inequities of circling back to rent assistance and like the disenfranchisement of Black people that we see, that we historically see and know of, but like knowing about it and learning about it where you are stationed in your life is really important. And Asheville is one of the most gentrified places in the country, and so that within itself adds to the nuance of the inequities that are happening throughout Asheville. And we've seen this summer how even though the demands from Black ABL were implemented in some fraction, there was still a great disparity and great inequity within these communities that have been silenced and are continued to be marginalized, still feel like they're not seen and still feel like they're not heard. And so I think the impact hasn't been as great as it should have been, because within the impact, the intent feels like it's still centering and celebrating white supremacy in all that it is, which within white supremacy is to silence and hopefully erase these communities. And so, yeah, that's what I've been seeing around the impact these last 7 to 8 months in Asheville. Yeah, this is a really important question because it's very present, and not only has it happened the last several centuries, but it continues to happen. And this year especially, there's been a lot of invalidating of history. And in one of my classes this past semester, we talked about history and memory and how they're very synonymous to each other. And I feel like where the denial of history comes into play is folks' memory and how they want to misconstrue memory, and how there's a lot of power and a lot of agency and autonomy within one's memory. And so generationally speaking, if folks, push out this certain narrative to generations to come, that is the memory within itself in those moments, how they are going to show up in later stages of their life. And so throughout the history of these generations, speaking more so from a familial sense, memory is really important, and I feel like oftentimes more than not used as a divisive tool, and really configures history in a way that feels like we're constantly trying to fight for people just to believe in the facts, believe in the evidence, when that in itself feels really, really weird to do when it's right there. And so, yeah, I feel like people have to start reclaiming all the messiness that history is, because history is very inherently messy, and really have to go back and do, that work within their lineage, that they have witnessed that history started to convolute itself. And yeah, it starts with self. It starts with inward work and inward healing. We have to really do a lot of healing when it comes to generational trauma, which is something I'm very adamant about. Listen is one of the steps and strategies that I try to implement and facilitate in spaces. We have to listen, and listening is hard. Active listening is hard, especially when you feel like you are in a position where no one is listening to you. So like, how do we invite ourselves, those that feel like we are the unheard, into these spaces to not only trust that the folks in those spaces with us will listen, but also trust in ourselves that we will go in with a mindset of listening, even if there are narratives and experiences that combat who we are and what we believe in. How if we're like really trying to strive towards liberation for all peoples, for me, that looks like listening and coming to some equilibrium within the framework that is very unstable and continues to crumble. This past year, there's been a lot of talk around like, the word is leaving my mind, but abolition. And for me, abolition is transformation and like the possibility of what is to come. And so I think of liberation, I think of, the possibility of what is to come with liberation and what is to come to get to liberation. And so listening and education is so important. Like there's so many resources and so many tools and so many folks that are educators that are doing this work day in and day out, who deserve to be compensated way more than they're being compensated for. But yeah, listening and education are two that are coming to mind. And love is so important. I feel like at the root of anything is love. At the root of any individual is love. It's been really hard for me to like come to terms with that when I think of folks that spew out hateful rhetoric. And I know deep down there is some capacity of love inside of them that has been misconstrued, as I spoke on earlier, and has been influenced by narratives and experiences that influence them, as well as like their upbringing. Like childhood is really important, and that's like an area where people also need to go back and do a lot of work around. So yeah, learning, education, listening, space holding are strategies and action steps that we need to take.
My name is Ben Scales. I'm a lawyer here in Asheville, and my work around racial and social justice, I basically have two different tracks I follow there. One is professional and one's personal. Professionally, as a lawyer, I work with groups like the Racial Justice Coalition, Standing Up for Racial Justice, Asheville Black Lives Matter, and I work with a group of lawyers that serves as legal observers for the protest marches that we had over the summer. On a personal level, I volunteer with Asheville City Schools quite a bit, and I serve as a big brother to a young man who's being raised in a single parent family by his great grandmother. Well, I guess first and foremost, I recognize the great degree of white privilege that I enjoy and benefit from. Being in a city as diverse as Asheville could be, and having as many friends and coworkers and colleagues of color that I have, I'm made aware on a near daily basis of the differences that people have in their lives, solely because of the color of their skin. And I feel that it's important for people like me to do what we can to increase equity and inclusion across all social platforms. Well, I think in Asheville, it's really apparent. I mean, the redlining and the way that the highway system was laid out to physically segregate people in communities of color away from the centers of town, and cities throughout the South have a history of Jim Crow and segregation that the legacies of which still exist today. This is a tough one because the immediate reaction is, well, we need to educate these people who deny this history. And I definitely think that's a component, but I think that the true solution to the problem comes if we can empower people of color so that the history doesn't matter as much as the present. And I think that one way we do that is by, what I can fall back on is my Christian faith. And I feel that if we act like Christ would have us act, if we lead by example, the people of color will benefit from that and will marginalize those that would deny the history. I think we just eventually just have to move past the people that deny the history and get to the point where we marginalize those thought processes. Well, I think one of the best strategies we could have is increasing the amount of personal interconnection we have. We need to be proximate in each other's communities, and sometimes that's not comfortable. But in particularly white people, I think, need to go where people of color are and be proximate with them in their communities, and they need to also invite people of color into their own communities. I think that when we are together, when we are talking to each other face to face, our differences seem to disappear. And I think that's one of the first steps, I think, to achieving true equity and inclusion.